Hey folks, it's that time of year again where I'm starting to get calls from students freaking out because college applications are due soon and they don't have their essays done. So I've decided to put together this little video to really help those procrastinators out there. And what I particularly want to do is give some specific, actually helpful advice for writing essays that are poem. So what is poem? Well, first of all, poem essays are polished. And that means your essays are clear and concise. There's no confusion about what you're trying to say, and there's no rambling, and there's no repetition. Your essays are cohesive with naturally flowing ideas, and they're free from any types of errors. Your essay is also original, and that can be in terms of the topic of the story you tell, or even in the format, the structure, the style you use. It also means your essay is effective, meaning it conveys important messages about you. It's focused and organized when it does so, and it portrays you in the best possible light. And finally, your essay is memorable, meaning that admissions councils will actually remember it when it comes time to make a decision. You can make your essay memorable by having the first three characteristics of poem, sometimes adding a little humor and humility to smooth out the rough edges, and also by having a great hook and a conclusion. So this video will walk you through the 4 parts of poem and also give you concrete steps for actually writing your essay. All right, let's look at poem in action. Here are a couple advertisements for tutors who want to help students write their college application essays. Advertisement A says, "For over a decade, I have helped high school students brainstorm ideas, organize their thoughts, and find their voices when drafting their college application essay. Together, we revise their essays until they are perfect, and multiple of my students have been accepted by their dream schools specifically because of our efforts." Advertisement B reads, "I am really good at helping high school students write their college application essays. My students are always extremely happy with the results, and the essays that we produce inevitably lead to success. I will do my best to ensure that your essay is as well written as possible and something that you are proud to submit." Now, if you want, take a moment and write in the comments which advertisement you prefer. Both of these advertisements are reasonably well written, but before you fork over your hard-earned money, you might want to ask yourself some basic questions. For example, what does the tutor in advertisement B actually mean when he or she says really good, extremely happy, or even success? Sometimes when the parent of a student I work with tells me that that student gets really good grades, they're talking about a B or a B+. Other times, the parent will tell me, my student only gets about average grades, and that will mean an A-. So it really depends on the frame of reference, and these adverbs and adjectives aren't really doing a lot to provide us details. Furthermore, do you have any real sense of what Tutor B will actually do in terms of helping you write your essay? Tutor A, on the other hand, actually gives some specific steps he or she will take in terms of working with a student, such as brainstorming ideas, organizing thoughts, and helping them find their own voice. Tutor A also is a little bit more specific about the success he or she has had in the past. Overall, I think student A does a better job of describing what he or she will do, whereas tutor B is more telling, which is something we want to avoid with our college application essays. Before we proceed with writing the actual essay, here's a few things to keep in mind. First, there's more than one way to approach college application essays and supplements. This is really for students who are having trouble just getting started. Second, not everyone is going to love your essay no matter how good it is. A lot of writing is subjective. Nevertheless, there are some elements that are universal to good writing, and we really want to focus and master those in our essays. And then finally, again, this video is geared if you're having trouble getting started and you really need sort of a step-by-step process to help you get writing. Okay, the first thing you really have to understand is the purpose of the college application essay. So it's a chance for you to express something important about yourself that you haven't already communicated through your application. Or you have, but you need to elaborate upon it more. Second, you need to observe the word limits. For the Common App, that's 650 words. Doesn't mean you should pad your essay and have 650 words if it's not necessary, but it also means you don't just have one paragraph. So know the limits for both the Common App and the supplements and other essays you'll be writing. Third, this is your chance to showcase your writing skills and your unique style. You want that to come across. You want your voice to be there. Colleges will be able to tell if you have not written this essay. And finally, you want to make it impossible for admissions counselors to say no through the personal statement. And through your supplements, you want to show that you're committed to attending this school. It's your number one choice, even if it might not actually be. Now that we understand the purpose of the essay, we have to decide upon a prompt and understand what that prompt requires of us. For the Common App, you can choose one of two types of broad prompts, and that would be a specific task where you answer a question, or you could address the open-ended response where you can really write about anything nowadays. Furthermore, for the specific task, you can either talk about yourself, or you can address an external outside issue. So when most students prefer to talk about themselves, a unique background they have, a story they've gone through. When you address the issue, you're actually describing yourself as well. You're talking about your thought process. But for students who maybe are uncomfortable talking about themselves, addressing a problem or something in the world might be a better option for them. Generically, the essay in which you talk about yourself might ask something like, what makes you unique? What's your background? Or something like, describe an important lesson you've learned from a mistake. Whereas an address an issue might be, what would you fix about the world today and how would you accomplish it? Alternatively, some schools don't even use the Common App and instead ask students to address a specific prompt. And many schools, particularly this year with COVID, require supplements, or they might have some optional supplements that you're still going to want to write. With these types of essays, make sure you fully address all the tasks and questions asked. Answer every part. They're looking to see if you can follow directions. Second, make sure you tailor your responses for each school. Again, this is an opportunity to show your commitment to that school, and if you provide something generic here and you don't do your research, you're not going to make a very convincing argument that you plan to attend. Some examples might include, why our school and what will you contribute, and also what's your intended major and why. And finally, describe a challenge you've overcome and who you turn to for help. That's sort of like the Common App essay. It's sort of a light form of it. If you're feeling a little overwhelmed at this point, fear not. I want you to remember that writing is far more collaborative than we often imagine, and you should be seeking help throughout this entire process. Look to family, friends, educators, anyone. They're going to be more than happy to help, and you don't always have to use that help. You can take what's good and you can discard what's bad, but you're not in this alone. Okay, step number 1, it is time to brainstorm. You need to come up with some ideas about what you could write about, and I would suggest coming up with more than one originally. So this is the part where students often freeze up, and it's good to ask yourself some basic questions to help you get going here. First off, what do schools need to know about you? They have your application, they have your grades and test scores and your activities, but what else do they need to know so that they really get a sense of who you are? What could you talk about for an hour passionately? What's the story you love to tell? When I'm working with a student and they don't really know what to write about, I just said, hey, pretend you're stuck on a bus with me for an hour. What would we talk about? And you would get so wrapped up in that hour would just fly by. If you're having trouble with this, students often do, why don't you turn to some sources for inspiration? Maybe you keep a journal, talk to family. They often remember things you don't. Talk to friends. Look at your schoolwork, things you've written in the past, projects you're really proud of. Look at your extracurricular activities. Look at your work. Look at your community service. If you really get desperate, turn to some great works of art and see if they get you thinking. Some prompts will actually ask you about great works of art. For the supplements, as I said before, make sure you do your research. Have some concrete things about the school that you are interested in that you can write about, something maybe they only offer. And finally, don't try to anticipate what schools want to read. And remember, the mundane is just as good as the profound. Let me give you a few examples of some of the things my students have written about in the past that I thought made for great essays. And again, they're going to show, some great stories that they have and maybe some more mundane, everyday things. One of my favorite essays of all time, and I want you to think about what this story says about the student without actually saying it, was about a salamander. So the story went that the father was out in the backyard mowing the lawn, and he's one of these dads who mows until the whole lawn is done. And while he's out there, the engine suddenly cuts off, and the student with his mom and his sister run over to see what's wrong, and it turned out the dad had actually nicked the leg off of a poor little salamander. Well, this student immediately ran into the house, and he got a tissue box, and he filled it with soil and moss, and he carefully placed the salamander inside that box. And then right away, he started doing research online about what he could do for this salamander. He even called up some local nature centers, and he found that he could take a toothpick and actually fashion a little prosthetic limb for the salamander. And he did this. He stuck it onto the salamander, and he let that little sucker walk around for a few days on that. And things seemed to be going well. He was feeding it, and the salamander seemed to be bouncing back. Hopefully it was going to regenerate a limb at some point. I think about the third or fourth day, he looked in the box, and unfortunately the poor salamander had passed away. Now think about all the great messages that come across about this student. He was empathetic and caring. He was resourceful. He was self-motivated. And his essay also included an important lesson about being able to do what you can, but also accepting that not everything is in your control. Another student I work with wrote about a particular type of car he owned, and this car sort of has a community, an online community, but also an in-person community where I guess when people are broken down by the side of the road, other owners of this particular model will come and stop by and ask for help. And so he wrote about this passion he had for this car, but the essay was really about people and how he made connections with people who were older than him and people across the country just through this car. And finally, another one of my students did have a profound story to write about. He was born with a serious health problem and kind of inspired his desire to become a doctor. So he wrote about that process, but really what made that journey, I should say, that essay very effective was the humor and humility he placed in it. Joking about his condition, having to explain it to people, being fascinated with the human body, and some gruesome tasks that most of us would probably avoid. So my point is this: if you have a passion project, if you have something that you love, there is probably a story there. And you might need to talk to somebody who knows you well to get it, but you were probably interested in that pursuit for a reason, and it says something good about you. And this is the time to think about as many of those things as you can. It can be something you've done. It can be something you've experienced. Prompts, you should look at the Common App prompts. They might help you think about what exactly you want to write about, whether it's a challenge, whether it's something you've actually produced or created. All right, once you've come up with some ideas, maybe 2 or 3, it's time to look for the messages in those ideas. Why did you choose to write about this particular topic? Will your essay say something about you in terms of, are you bold? Are you committed? Are you curious, driven, empathetic, resourceful? Try to see that potential message in the story you are talking about. It's important to focus on just 2 to 3 messages, though. Sometimes I have students and they want to write everything about themselves in it, and you don't have the time or the space to really talk about all those things. And then, unlike the chicken or the egg, it doesn't matter if your messages or your stories come first. You can go ahead and maybe even just start writing if you have inspiration one day, and after you start noting a few maybe sensory details or something like that, you'll start to see a story developing in there. And a note about writing: don't just sit in front of a computer. Go out, mow the lawn, take a walk, do whatever. It's really hard to sit in front of a screen and come up with ideas. Get your phone out, bring a notepad, go do something else. Think about the essay, what you could be doing while you're doing this mundane task, and all of a sudden ideas will start flowing in. With all that being said, are there some topics you should avoid writing about? I like to tell my students they can pretty much write about anything, but yeah, there are some things I would be very careful about. Number 1, what I call the Mother Teresa essay, that you're holier than thou, that you live just to help other people. Yeah, if community service is important to you, if volunteering is a big part of your life, write about it, but throw a little humility in there. Maybe admit you got involved in it and it wasn't your original idea. Or maybe you're not always the best at it and you're trying to learn. Then there's the ploy for sympathy essay. And I don't think a lot of you attempt to do this, but when you write about a health issue or something that's been difficult for you, sometimes it can come across as you're playing the world's tiniest violin, that you're purposely trying to manipulate emotionally, and that can be a real danger. And also keep in mind, people can read into things that aren't there. If you admit that you have some sort of condition that might affect you as a student, people may judge you by that. So if you're going to write the sort of, this is something I've gone through a health-wise or something, be careful. Make sure if it could lead to doubts about you as a student, you show that that's no longer an issue. And add a little humor, in particular, to these essays, because they can be very dark sometimes. What about the sports essay? I get this a lot, and I used to preach this: don't write the classic sports essay. Look, for a lot of my students, all they care about is sports. And I would say the classic sports essay is, I beat my best score, or we won the championship. That's the classic sports essay. That's what people are sick about. If you write an essay where you talk about how you built a sense of community on your team, or you honored a coach, or you added some kind of program, or you figured out how the team could stay together during the difficult times of COVID, that's more interesting. That's not really about sports. You're using the topic of sports to really discuss something else. Maybe how you're a leader, maybe how you are empathetic, maybe how you're a problem solver. So yeah, you can write about sports, but just don't make it that, I finally pitched a no-hitter or something like that essay. And then a list of accomplishments essay. Hey, I did this, I did this, I did this. That's what your application's for. You can talk about things in your applications. You can talk about activities, but pick just one or maybe two that shows a greater point you're trying to make. But don't just brag here. And finally, I would definitely avoid the negative essay, and I think an essay can be negative in two ways. Number one, if you talk about the time you robbed the liquor store, that's probably not going to go off very well. But more importantly, the negative essay is usually, I hated school, or I hated this program, or, I don't like this. Imagine you're applying to a school and you want to say, hey, I looked at this other school and I hated it, and I like yours much better. Don't do that either. So don't go negative, is basically what I'm saying. All right, step number 3, plan and outline. Right away I'm going to say, I know there's some people who hate to outline. That used to be me. I was taught a real rigid way of doing it in high school. We had to do the Roman numerals and the capital letters. I hated it. I felt I was spending more time writing the outline than I was actually writing the paper, and not in a good way. But I'm here to tell you that, number one, you're going to avoid a lot of frustrations later. Specifically, you're going to figure out the best way to convey your story. It's okay if that changes up a little bit, but you don't want to write a first draft and just have it be a mess and no organization whatsoever. You're going to need someone else's help to figure out what you're trying to do. Second, a lot of times you come up with great examples, things you want to put in your essay. And in that moment, you know exactly why you want to use it. And a half an hour later, you don't have a clue. So in your outline, if you're going to talk about some things, put a note or two about why you're going to talk about it. And then third, you're having too many ideas at this point. That really should be the problem. And right now, you're going to start chopping some of these things. Like, I'm going to tell the story of this organization or club I started in school, and we went on this trip, and we had a guest speaker, and blah, 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 blah. And you're not going to be able to fit all those things in. So now's the time to start focusing on what you really have to say. Another benefit about planning and outlining is you can consider how the format and structure of your essay could inspire some creativity. I'm having students this year do some really creative things and, writing little snippets of plays or videos or even having some poems. They're really mixing up the usual format, which I'm not used to, but it's great. And so this is a chance in the early stages when you're planning out how you're going to execute these ideas, you can get into some creativity you wouldn't have thought of before. And that's a point you should remember. This is not a traditional school essay with the introduction and a conclusion and a thesis and arguments. You may have some points you're making in your essay, that's true, but this is more descriptive. You're telling a story in most cases. Some of the prompts may be more issue focused and it will take on more of that format, but certainly with the Common App and when you do the free response, whatever your imagination can think of, as long as it's a good idea, go ahead and try it. But finally, I get it. Again, you may hate outlining, so don't. At least not yet. If you really are that against it, like I used to be, start writing a draft and let that draft actually help you produce an outline later. But commit to producing it later because it's going to help you see how your idea should actually flow. Okay, now it's time to write a crappy first draft, and I do mean crappy. Okay, this is a part, again, where students often will freeze out. So just start writing, but keep these ideas in mind. You want to describe here and explain. There's a lot of memes going around on the internet. Tell me something without telling me something. That's what you want to do here. So, for example, I am a leader. Don't write that in your essay. Don't write any statement like that. Instead, think about how you're a leader. I arrived early to every practice to help set up. I organized team building events like pasta dinners, and I never warmed the bench. I always cheered for my teammates between at-bats. That's very descriptive. You get an idea of what was actually done. Maybe you won't use all of that, but get it out there. Don't just say, I'm a leader. You're not going to have much on the page. Transport your reader through details. So, for example, it was very cold. We talked about very before and words like that. What does that mean? Instead, with every step into the pitch black darkness of the woods, my boots crushed the freshly fallen snow, while the frigid wind burned my exposed fingertips. I'm not always the most poetic, but you get the idea here. It's far more descriptive. It's far more sensory. Sometimes I will have students write about topics that I could care less about or I have no frame of reference. Dance is a big one, and I know you're dancers, you're all into it, but if you saw me, you would see I am not graceful on my feet. But I love some of these essays because they're so detail-oriented. Even though I'm not going to be in a little pink tutu spinning around, I get what it's about from the way it's described. And with whatever you choose to write about, you can't assume that your reader, your audience, is going to know what you're talking about. Could be specific to the part of the country you're in. So it's your job to transport that reader there, and you need to provide the details in order to do that. A few more points about this first draft. Write like you speak. I see a lot of students get hung up because they love this phrase that comes into their head or something, and that can be great for inspiration. But at the end of the day, you might chop it. So just write like you're talking to someone in the beginning. You can come back and polish later. Also, try to write too much at this point rather than too little. It's much easier. Psychologically, it's a lot easier on you if you have stuff to cut rather than add. And then finally, use this first draft to really figure out what's important. And like I said before, to come up with an outline for your second draft. I prefer, when I start writing that more polished second draft, to get a fresh computer screen, fresh document, about to say fresh piece of paper, you can tell how old I am, and write from scratch by copying over from the first draft. If something was good in the first draft, I will repeat it. If it was just all right, I'm going to change it up in that moment, and that's really helpful for me. So that first draft is acting not only as a way just to start organizing your thoughts and get your ideas out, but now you're going to kind of reverse engineer a new outline that will be your final product. All right, once you got your cake basically ready, you got a solid foundation, it's time to add the frosting or the roof of the house, whatever metaphor you prefer. So we're going to build interest and refine your message. Remember, you want to hook your audience right away. The people who are going to be reviewing your essay, they're going to be reading maybe hundreds and thousands a day, and you have to stand out from the pack. So you need a way to grab them. Have them pay attention. How can you do this? Well, think about the last great book you read, movie you watched, or TV show you binged. How did those pieces of work grab your attention? Did they tell a story out of sequence? That's an often used technique, particularly in movies. You get a little slice of the ending, you go back in time a little bit, and then you circle back to that ending. It's a great way right away to get somebody involved in a story without doing the sort of traditional, hey, I'm just going to talk in order. Second, did they draw a picture with words or images? And that's going back to being descriptive. You may want your first paragraph to be very sensory. Describe a smell, a sight, a sound, an emotion you're going through. And then the rest of the essay, you can back away from that a little bit and make your points. But it's all building off of that first impression. You got that, oh, okay, I'm there. I understand what this is about. A person is clearly scared, and I want to figure out why. I want to keep reading so I understand why. And that, again, evoking motions is a way you can do that. What about purposeful confusion? Every time Bree approached the glass, Maggie just stood there while her sisters cautiously backed away. What the heck am I talking about? Well, my wife and I love chickens, and one time we adopted a blind chicken. We didn't know it at first, and poor little Maggie would not move away from the glass whenever Bree the cat would approach. Now, you don't know any of that backstory when you first read those words. You might even be thinking Bree and Maggie are people, and certainly I referred to sisters. That would give you that impression. I've confused you, and you want to figure out, well, what's really happening there? Why are people backing away from glass? Maybe chickens aren't your first love, but you want to continue reading to figure out what exactly is going on. Again, using humor and humility to smooth the edges is a great way to also build interest. If you're talking about a very dark story, or even if you're bragging a little bit, throwing a little humor in there to show that you're not all serious, that you can lighten things up, makes the piece more interesting. I've had people in the past, they've written really good essays, and sooner or later there's a little bit of third grade humor in there with bodily functions, and it's a nice contrast from the serious, I'm a hardworking, studious student, to, hey, I can crack a smile every once in a while. Also, what about that conclusion? Is that more important than the intro? Maybe. They both play a strong part, and you want to leave a good impression by the time your reader's done. So I've had people end with a big picture statement. Hopefully it's not too cheesy. I've had people do a callback to the beginning, which is really clever. If you've ever watched Seinfeld, that show was great about tying different stories together and calling back to information earlier in the piece. I do have some students who like to leave on a cliffhanger. If you're a Sopranos fan, you know that created a lot of controversy. Not my favorite thing, but I know a lot of students who've written successful essays where they do that. It's up to you. How are you going to kind of stay in the reader's mind after they put your paper down? At this point, you've built some interest. You have a pretty good story to tell. Now you really need to get some feedback. But before you do that, before you share it with other people, you want to make sure it's presentable to other people. You don't want to waste their time and hand them something really sloppy. So take a little time, do some proofreading. Obviously, look for grammatical errors. Are your words and story clear to the uninitiated? You know, we all fall victim sometimes to groupthink. If you're working with someone on the essay, it can make perfect sense to you. Or if you're in your head about it the whole time, it makes exact sense to you what you're telling at that moment in the story. But for somebody who's not there, who's not privy to that internal dialogue, it may be really confusing. So try, if you can, to read it from a fresh lens. Step away from it a while, get a good night's sleep, read it the next day. Can you catch any places where you're like, oh, that really makes no sense because of something I cut out earlier or for some other reason? And that happens to me a lot. I will definitely take some time to read things that I draft before shopping them around. Have you trimmed the excess words and eliminated unnecessary repetition? Teachers, administrators at colleges, professors, they hate repetition. Sometimes repetition is necessary. Sometimes if you want to make a point or you're doing parallelism in your piece, you're starting with the same structure for each paragraph, that repetition is fine. There's a reason for it. But if you're just saying the same thoughts and ideas over and over and over again, your reader is going to get annoyed. Also, look at the way you're phrasing things. Due to the fact. No, just say because. Whenever you go into those really verbose phrases, you think you sound smart because they're in a lot of textbooks and things. But that is not good writing. That is what we think is good writing from these complicated textbooks that were maybe written by people who, although brilliant scientists or mathematicians or historians or whatever, weren't good writers. So the rest of your life, you are going to be trimming. There's a word limit here for a reason. Don't take up valuable real estate with awkward, ungainly, passive constructions. Avoid nominalizations, ION words when you don't need to. Be more direct. Talk like you speak. Don't dumb it down. You can use a fancy word here and there. You can use a fancy phrase. You can talk about a really complex subject, but don't make it complex for the sake of complexity. And that goes, again, to this last bullet point. If you use a fancy word wrong, it's going to hurt you a lot more than it would have benefited you by using it correctly. So watch your diction, okay? Make sure you're using words correctly. Again, maybe put the thesaurus away for a little bit. Bring it out maybe at the end, but make absolutely sure you're using that word right. Step 7, now it's time to solicit, evaluate, and incorporate constructive feedback. All right, so try to find 3 people who you really trust who were not part of the process. We don't want that groupthink going on again. When you give them your essay, ask them to come up with 2 to 3 impressions about you they get from your writing. If you like what you hear, if those messages that you intended are coming back to you, you're very close to being done with the process. If you're getting feedback that's scaring you a little bit, you may need to retool something, and significantly so. Keep this in mind. Some people may suggest change for the sake of change. I've encountered that a lot over the years. Don't be afraid to ask for the reasons somebody is suggesting a change. We want to sound like we're helping. We don't want to just say, oh, this is good to go. They're going to think, we're worried that people are going to think we didn't actually read it. No, if there's a change and it doesn't make sense to you, ask about it, but ultimately remember you don't have to incorporate it. And be careful who you ask. I know a lot of us want to ask English teachers, and they're great writers, but they're not always best at producing this type of essay. Some of them are, but it's a different type of essay. It's an application essay. You're not writing about great work of literature unless that's the particular topic you chose. So, get some people from varied interests. Get some friends, family, different professions. See what they think. All right, final step in the process, know when to stop, and this is important. You can drive yourself crazy with these essays. So, for example, have you achieved P.O.E.M, my little cheesy acronym? That means, is it polished, clear and concise, naturally flowing, cohesive? Does it all work together? Is it free from errors? Is it original in some way? It doesn't absolutely have to be original for original's sake, but you will impress more if you can do something a little bit new. And it doesn't have to be in the story you're telling. It could be in the way you're telling it, or the way you're combining pre-existing ideas. Is it effective? Extremely important. Are you focused and organized? Are you describing your messages, not just telling people what to think about you? Can they come to those conclusions on their own based on what you've said? And is it painting you in a positive light? Is it selling you to the schools? Finally, is it memorable? If you've done all of the above and you have a great hook and an impactful conclusion, and you've added the 2 H's of humor and humility, it is going to be memorable. People are going to put that essay down and say, that kid is in the yes or maybe pile, and I'm going to remember them later when it's time to fight for who gets accepted and who isn't. All right, one last bonus tip, has nothing to do with actually writing. Make sure you save your final drafts. Make sure you write in a different file and not on some kind of online application, except Google Docs is fine for that. Why? I've had students write in the Common App and there was a Common App glitch and it deleted everything they did. And I've had students come back to me 4 years later and say, hey, do you still have a draft of my college application essay? I want to use it for something. And usually I don't. So make sure you save that final draft. Extra precaution. Okay, that effect took way too long to achieve, but hopefully you found something helpful out of this video. Whether you did or not, please consider helping out the channel. Like the video if it was helpful to you. Subscribe to the channel, help me get this thing growing. Comment. You can answer that question from before. You can give me some suggestions about future videos. You can tell me if something was not clear in the presentation. Share the video. Sharing means caring. Help your buddies out at school. Finally, consider joining the channel on Patreon. I'm going to put a slide up of this video. I've got some other goodies there related to some math videos I made. But hopefully, overall, this Halloween, the thing that scares you the most will not be your college application essay.